Antonio was a rich and prosperous merchant of Venice, whose ships were on nearly every sea, as he traded with Portugal, with Mexico, with England, and with India. Although proud of his riches, Antonio was very generous with them, and delighted to use them in relieving the wants of his friends, among whom his relation, Bassanio, held the first place. Now Bassanio, like many gallant gentlemen, was reckless and extravagant, and had come to the end of his fortune, and was unable to pay his creditors. He went to Antonio for further help. "To you, Antonio," he said, "I owe the most in money and in love, and I have thought of a plan to pay everything I owe, if you will but help me." "Say what I can do, and it shall be done," answered his friend. Then said Bassanio, "In Belmont is a lady richly left, and from all quarters of the globe renowned suitors come to woo her, because she is beautiful and good as well. I feel sure that I should win her away from all rivals for her love, had I but the means to go to Belmont, where she lives. All my fortunes," said Antonio, "are at sea, and so I have no ready money. But luckily my credit is good in Venice, and I will borrow for you what you need." There was living in Venice at this time a rich money-lender named Shylock. Antonio despised and disliked this man very much, and treated him with the greatest harshness and scorn. He would thrust him, like a cur, over his threshold. Shylock submitted to all these indignities with a patient shrug, but deep in his heart he cherished a desire for revenge on the rich, smug merchant. For Antonio both hurt his pride and injured his business. "But for him," thought Shylock, "I should be richer by 500,000 ducats. On the marketplace, and wherever he can, he denounces the rate of interest I charge, and, worse than that, he lends out money freely." So when Bassanio came to him to ask for a loan of 3,000 ducats to Antonio for 3 months, Shylock hid his hatred, and turning to Antonio, said, "Harshly as you have treated me, I would be friends with you and have your love. So I will lend you the money and charge you no interest. But, just for fun, you shall sign a bond in which it shall be agreed that if you do not repay me in 3 months' time, then I shall have the right to a pound of your flesh, to be cut from what part of your body I choose." "No," cried Bassanio to his friend, "you shall run no such risk for me." "Why, fear not," said Antonio. "My ships will be home a month before the time. I will sign the bond." Thus, Bassanio was furnished with the means to go to Belmont. The very night he started, the money-lender's pretty daughter, Jessica, ran away from her father's house with her lover, and she took with her from her father's hoards some bags of ducats and precious stones. Shylock's grief and anger were terrible to see. His only comfort now was in hearing of the serious losses which had befallen Antonio, some of whose ships were wrecked. "Let him look to his bond," said Shylock. Meanwhile Bassanio had reached Belmont and had visited the fair Portia. He found, as he had told Antonio, that her wealth and beauty had drawn to her suitors from far and near. But to all of them Portia had but one reply. She would only accept a suitor who would pledge himself to abide by the terms of her father's will. These were conditions that frightened away many, for he who would win Portia's hand had to guess which of 3 caskets held her portrait. If he guessed right, then Portia would be his bride. If wrong, then he was bound by oath to never reveal which casket he chose, never to marry, and to go away at once. The caskets were of gold, silver, and lead. The gold one bore this inscription: "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." The silver one had this: "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves." While on the lead one were these words: "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath." The Prince of Morocco was among the first to submit to this test. He chose the gold casket, for he said neither base lead nor silver could contain her picture. So he chose the gold casket, and found inside the likeness of what many men desire, death. After him came the haughty Prince of Aragon, and saying, "Let me have what I deserve. Surely I deserve the lady." He chose the silver one, and found inside a fool's head. "Did I deserve no more than a fool's head?" he cried. Then at last came Bassanio, and Portia would have delayed him from making his choice, from the very fear of his choosing wrong, for she loved him dearly, even as he loved her. "But," said Bassanio, "let me choose at once, for, as I am, I live upon the rack." Then Portia bade her servants to bring music and play while her gallant lover made his choice, and Bassanio walked up to the caskets, the musicians playing softly all the while. "Mere outward show," he said, "is to be despised. The world is still deceived with ornament, and so no gaudy gold or shining silver for me. I choose the lead casket, joy be the consequence." And opening it, he found fair Portia's portrait inside. "Yes," said Portia, "I am yours, and this house is yours, and with them I give you this ring, from which you must never part." And Bassanio could hardly speak for joy, did swear that he would never part with the ring while he lived. Then suddenly all his happiness was dashed with sorrow, for messengers came from Venice to tell him that Antonio was ruined, and that Shylock demanded a pound of the merchant's flesh. Portia was as grieved as Bassanio to hear of the danger which threatened his friend. "First," she said, "take me to the church and make me your wife, and then go to Venice at once to help your friend. You shall take with you money enough to pay his debt 20 times over." But when her husband had gone, Portia went after him, and arrived in Venice disguised as a lawyer, whom the Duke of Venice had called in to decide the legal questions raised by Shylock's claim to a pound of Antonio's flesh. When the court met, Bassanio offered Shylock twice the money borrowed, if he would withdraw his claim, but the moneylender's only answer was, if every ducat in 6,000 ducats were in 6 parts, and every part a ducat, I would not draw them. I would have my bond. It was then that Portia arrived in her disguise, and not even her husband knew her. The Duke gave her welcome, and left the settlement of the case to her. Then in noble words she bade Shylock have mercy.
She said, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives, and him that takes."
But Shylock was deaf to her entreaties. "I will have the pound of flesh," was his reply. "What have you to say?" asked Portia of the merchant. "But little," he answered. "I am armed and well prepared." "The court awards you a pound of Antonio's flesh," said Portia to the moneylender. "Most righteous judge," cried Shylock. "A sentence. Come, prepare." "Tarry a little. This bond gives you no right to Antonio's blood, only to his flesh. If, then, you spill a drop of his blood, all your property will be forfeited to the state. Such is the law." And Shylock, in his fear, said, "Then I will take Bassanio's offer." "No," said Portia sternly, "you shall have nothing but your bond. Take your pound of flesh, but remember that if you take more or less, even by the weight of a hair, you will lose your property and your life." Shylock now grew very much frightened. "Give me my 3,000 ducats that I lent him, and let him go." Bassanio would have paid it to him, but Portia said, "No, he shall have nothing but his bond." "You, a foreigner," she added, "have sought to take the life of a Venetian citizen, and thus by the Venetian law, your life and goods are forfeited. Down, therefore, and beg mercy of the Duke." Thus were the tables turned, and no mercy would have been shown to Shylock had it not been for Antonio. As it was, the money-lender forfeited half his fortune to the state, and he had to settle the other half on his daughter's husband, and with this he had to be content. Bassanio, in his gratitude to the clever lawyer, was induced to part with the ring his wife had given him, and with which he had promised never to part. And when on his return to Belmont he confessed as much to Portia, she seemed very angry, and vowed she would not be friends with him until she had her ring again. But at last she told him that it was she who, in the disguise of the lawyer, had saved his friend's life, and got the ring from him. So Bassanio was forgiven, and made happier than ever to know how rich a prize he had drawn in the lottery of the caskets.